First of all, welcome to St Ambrose High School, and a very special thanks to Ellen and her team for hosting us this morning. I'm sure you'll agree that the senior pupils, as you come in the door, tea and coffee was very, very impressive. So thank you, Ellen, and you need please pass that on. Thank you. And also a special thank you to all of you for coming out this morning. Really pleased that we have a whole range of people here, from early years, from nursery, primary, secondary, centre officers, and indeed our CLD colleagues as well. We also actually have here Councillor McGuigan, our Vice Convener, and welcome Councillor McGuigan. And at the back, we've actually got a range of senior pupils, and welcome to all of you this morning as well. I'm pleased you're here. Now, the purpose of today was really to give me an opportunity, first of all, to get to know you as a collective, and also to let me share with you what my thinking is in terms of what I see as the strengths of North Lanarkshire, and indeed the challenges and opportunities that we have over the next 3 years. I have a presentation this morning which I'm going to talk through. I've not timed the presentation, but I'm anticipating it might last about an hour. And that's partly why Johnny's here. We'll come on to that in a second, because the first thing I was going to say was Johnny Depp is to my left. Now, I was going to go around the audience and say, what are the similarities between Johnny Depp and myself? Now, I know that many of you would say probably panache, looks, sophistication, coolness, but sadly it's none of those things. The one similarity between me and Johnny Depp is that neither of us will want to watch our film when it's completed. And you'll see at the back this has been filmed this morning. But as a second purpose for Johnny, because I thought if things get really bad during the presentation and you want to zone out, then indeed you've got something attractive to look at. In the 5 weeks I've been here, I've been around a number of schools, I think 16, 17 schools, spoken to a number of heads. And one of the messages I'm getting is very much that we'd like to refresh the strategic approach to our head teachers meetings. And what I was thinking was the themes I put up in terms of the challenges may indeed become part of the agenda of our heads meetings. And we can focus upon those and collectively work together to think, well, how do we resolve some of these issues? So that will change the emphasis. But I'll take your advice on that towards the end, and we'll see how that actually develops. So what I'd like to do today is actually on the screen, as you'll see, and I'll talk for a few minutes about what I say is my early perception of the strengths of this authority. And then I want to really focus on the challenges over the next 3 years. And I have to say, colleagues, I will start with pointing out the strengths, but my purpose of today really is to set challenge. I recognise we're all working really hard and we're doing really well, but like any authority in Scotland, we want to do the very best. And hopefully some of the themes I'll pick up will give us some food for thought in terms of how we focus specifically in terms of where we want to go. And part of that we'll be thinking about what actually are the priorities. Now, in my past life many years ago, I was a history teacher. And I used to say to pupils in S5 higher classes that the difference between an A-pass essay and a C-pass essay is the C-pass essay, the candidate wants to tell you everything that he or she knows about the subject, whereas the A-pass essay answers the question. And certainly to use that as an example, we can do so many different things, a scattergun approach, but if we get to the nub of what actually makes the impact, then indeed we can actually make a difference, and we'll come on to that in the course of the presentation. And then to round it up, I want to do a summary of the key themes that I think are really important, where in fact we can make both short-term, medium-term and long-term difference. But let me start with the strengths in the system. And they're on the screen for you just now. You can read them for yourself. And these are really important strengths, particularly for me, about the fact that we've got really committed and supported staff right across all parts of the service, from early years, primary, secondary, community learning development, central support staff. We've all got the same focus and the same outcome, because we're all about the young people and the children and indeed the families. And that strength and the passion working together really can make a massive impact. And that really excites me in terms of working in North Lanarkshire. I mean, I'll have to say to you, colleagues will know that the last 2 years I was director over in Falkirk. I was very happy over there, did a lot of good work, and there were not a lot of jobs that would have attracted me, but this job was one I was really keen to do. And part of it was the scale, but also was about the values and the culture. That's important to me, the values and the culture of the community, of the service, of the organisation, and I thought that fits with what I want to do in terms of my own background, my own philosophy, and that's why I'm so delighted to be here. And you see other areas, we've got support of elected members, we've got great young people. I mean, you saw the young people this morning as you come in. We've got some at the back. We've got a great baseline from which to work. And the work that's happened in the past, that's been led by Christine, again, some really good stuff. I mean, North Lanarkshire's got a nationally good reputation, and we want to sustain and actually build upon that. I then thought, it does us no harm to say, what are the kind of focus areas across North Lanarkshire, and what's important? Well, there's the summary of the corporate plan. And when I was applying for this job and looking through the corporate plan, I was actually very impressed with the corporate plan, because I've seen many corporate plans which can be very large volumes, which don't make much sense. But actually, that makes a lot of sense. And to think that the whole council plan of every service is focused, as you see in terms of the sentence at the bottom there, that we believe that everybody's got the capacity to learn, everyone's got the capacity, and all we have to do, and we are the leaders in this room, is unlock the potential of that capacity to deliver what's actually on the screen above you. And then, for those who haven't looked at it yet, I actually do commend to you the Education Scotland corporate plan. I know it's taken them 2 years to develop it, but actually it's a very good read, and it's got it's very pointed comments in terms of what the priorities are. And you'll see there, that's the fundamental vision of Education Scotland for each local authority in Scotland. And I think that is what should be the vision for us as well. I mean, I'm sure absolutely no one will disagree. Some key words in there. We want to be one of the most effective education systems in the world. We want, in fact, to work as partners flexibly together, because another theme in my presentation this morning will be it's about partnership working. No early years establishment, no nursery, no primary school, no secondary school can achieve all of this alone. The agenda's too big. The way we will actually achieve what we want to achieve for North Lanarkshire is actually in proper partnership working. Recognising that we're all developing the same outcomes, we're working together, and that is what will make the difference. And actually that's what that alludes to in terms of the statement. So indeed, we know what the outcomes that we want for young people. We know the difference we want to make. So why has it not happened? Why don't we, at this point in time in Scotland, have the best education system in the world? Why don't we have every single young person achieving his or her full potential? And that's what I want to tease out over the next part of this presentation. And I thought for some colleagues this might be a helpful slide just to set a context for us. What I've put up there is in terms of the population. And the key thing for me is there are just under 55,000 young people in North Lanarkshire. 55,000. And what's important is that the people in this room are actually the key holders to the success of each and every one of those 55,000 young people. Indeed, this is not a badge. This is a key. Because our actions, our values, our philosophy will shape how these young people do in their lives. That is a major responsibility and indeed a major privilege that we have. And for me, what's important is that every single one of those 54,000 plus young people have the key opened to the door that they want. And it's not a selective door, which lets some people through but bars others, but is really fully inclusive and allows them to go through the door to where they actually want to go to. So 55,000 young people, and I would like to hold on to that number in your head this morning, because what I'm going to talk to you about today is about all of us. It's not about one sector. It's about the inclusive approach. It's about we're all working in together, and it is about the North Lanarkshire's 55,000 young people and what we are delivering for them across the whole spectrum of learning and teaching. And you see there the number of schools we have, so it's a big scale. Okay, moving on to the challenges. And this is the core of the presentation. These are what I see are the main challenges, and I have them in a particular order. And the first one is to eradicate the negative educational outcomes caused by disadvantage and inequality. Now, colleagues, I am sure I'm not the only person in this room who was brought up in a single-parent family in a council estate with a large family over a period. And what was it that allowed me to be relatively successful in my life? Because all the indicators, if you actually take these indicators, would have suggested that I would not have been successful. 5 children, a mum, a 2-bedroom council house. Why would you do that? And all my family did well. Now, I do not believe in the concept of saying he was perhaps intelligent, he was able. That's just not true. And for those of you who read Matthew Syed's book, Bounce, which I do recommend to you, an excellent book which talks about the myth of talent, actually summarises it for me beautifully when he says there are 3 key ingredients for success. One is great coaching or great teaching. The second one is hard work. And the third is an intrinsic motivation to do well because of these other factors. And those 3 factors, and he actually looks at right across all spectrums, from sport to music to drama to academic pursuits, and actually the same 3 ingredients do apply, no matter who they are, from Tiger Woods right through to Picasso. Those ingredients were actually present. And if I look at my own life, and I think, well, actually the first motivator and coach for me was my mother, who said to me, you will do well and you'll go to university. And no one questions their mother, so you believe that at the age of 5. And I did it because Mum said that to me. I was going to do that. And that's why one of my themes this morning, when I get to the point talking about intervention, I'll be talking to you about families. Because also, colleagues, if we're going to make a significant difference, it's not about working with individual children, it's about working with families, and particularly the mothers. Most of you will have heard the old adage, if you want to educate a village, educate the mothers. It is so true. And dads, I'm sorry, I'm a dad as well, but we're less important. Is get the mothers in support and we'll make the biggest difference to what happens. So that's the first thing. I also had very good teachers and I recognise the importance of hard work. So if that allowed to happen to me and for me, what do we need to do to extrapolate that, to allow that to be the case for every single young person, no matter where he and she come from? So I want to talk about that later. And for me, colleagues, that is what GIRFEC is about. And I'll come on back to that later. The second one I've got here is about early intervention, and it is about getting in early. I'm going to show you some national stats in a minute or two, which illustrate by the age of 5 we've got these differentials in place, which sadly are not being rectified just now. So we have to get in early, and that is why the early years is so important. But the early years working with families is really important. And all of us collectively in this room have a responsibility to recognise and prioritise that, because we've all got a role to play in it. I'll then flag up literacy. If we don't get literacy right, then young people will not attain. We know that. Now, the active literacy programmes in North Lanarkshire are nationally renowned, some great stuff happening here. I want to build on that, but what I want is to have absolutely no illiteracy. What a challenge that is, but it's not insurmountable. So what can we do about it? Numeracy is there too, important, but literacy for me is indeed the number one. Attainment and achievement. We talk about broader achievement here, and that's important, but colleagues, young people, to be successful, to be socially mobile, need qualifications. They need good attainment. End of story. If we don't give them good attainment and give them those qualifications, they will not be socially mobile. And if you read David Morris's book, The Social Animal, he's very clear about his American research. That is the most important thing they're going to get. Relevant qualifications, certainly, appropriate qualifications, but they need that to do well, and we need to drive up attainment to make sure that happens. I'll come back to that soon. Then it talks about positive destinations. We've got about 13% of young people in North Lanarkshire who end up in a negative destination by the time they leave school. So this year, 458 young people in North Lanarkshire, after 11 years of education, are doing nothing. That's 458. That's a very large primary school worth or a small secondary school worth. We need to sort that. We can't have that many young people in this community doing nothing at the end of education. And lastly, and I've said it again, and I will say it until I'm really boring people with it, it's about partnership working. I don't want to see silo working in North Lanarkshire. We can't afford to do it. Particularly, I will not talk about budget today at all. Hope that cheers you up. Other than to say, when we manage our resources well, partnership working is the most effective way to do that. Okay, so let's move on with some of these issues. This is actually taken from about 17 local authorities in Scotland. I've done some checking and it matches the profile also of North Lanarkshire. This is from Chem analysis. It doesn't matter, it could be Chem, it could be GL, it could be something else, but the message is consistent no matter what you use. If we take 50 as the national baseline in Scotland, you can see that in reading and writing, and young people on average in Scotland are around about there. Phonics, which is really about language and how people communicate, slightly below, but nothing significant. But moving on, if we'll suddenly go to the lowest 15% of our SIMD areas, that's the social indices of multiple deprivation, we immediately see a differential by the age of 5. Now, SIMD areas 1 to 4, as you'll see in a minute, are the worst. Now, a large percentage of young people in North Lanarkshire are sitting in the lower SIMD areas. A large percentage. So what that means for our early years and primary colleagues here, and indeed for our secondary colleagues, because the differential is not being matched as we speak, that young people by age of 5 are coming in already with a difference. And if you see that, for example, you can see a significant 4-point differential across the piece, for example, in terms of reading and slightly less in writing and phonological awareness. For me, this is an important one. If you consider that probably certainly 2/3 of North Lanarkshire young people would be in SIMD areas 1 to 6. Remember, 50 is your baseline, and if 50 is the average, 50 is not the top, at the peak, it's the average. 50 is the average. What we have here is young people in SIMD areas 1 to 5, and I hope, colleagues, you know the SIMD areas apply to your establishment, because you should. It's important to know that. You'll see here what's happening by the age of 5, and you'll see that indeed there's a massive differential already by the age of 5 to the stage almost of, in fact, of about 7 or 8 points at the scale of 50, and that's significant. Those that are very observant might ask the question, why is it that SIMD area 1 is performing slightly better than SIMD area 2? Part of the rationale for that is we tend to put our resources and our support, nurture, etc., into the most deprived areas, and we're seeing perhaps a percentage improvement because of that. Whereas SIMD 2 area, slightly falling under the radar, and 3, not getting the same input, and therefore you see the dip. And at the other end, you'll see 9 perform better than 10. That's perhaps the aspirational group who want to get to 10, putting in more of the effort. Because think back to what I said about the kind of the Matthew Sire bounce analysis, hard work, motivation, good coaching, teaching, very aspirational around 9, want these things, want to get to the category of 10, and therefore doing well. But we have this differential, and that tells us why we need to do something by the age of 5, in fact, between the ages of 3 and 5, do something in terms of minimising this negative disadvantage these young people are undergoing. Math scores, similar. Phonics score, you'll see similar again. So the message is consistent across the piece in terms of our SIMD. And there's the overall standardised score between our 5-year-olds in North Lanarkshire, between 1 and between 10. So I want you to reflect on that just now. Just think about those stats and ask yourself the question, okay, if that's an issue for us in North Lanarkshire as a community, and we want all young people to have the door open to them, what are we going to do to make sure that we get these youngsters in the SIMD areas 1 to 4 at least up to 50, if not more than that? And that's a challenge. And that is where the early years programme really kicks in a big way. And I'll come back to that later on. I'm now going to move across in terms of looking at some of our intelligence. One thing I should say I've not said yet is I've been in this game a long time, and I'm pretty experienced, and I use my intuition. But what my intuition has told me, actually, is that there's nothing better in terms of being properly self-evaluative other than using data and using intelligence. If you really know your establishment, if you know your service, you know the data and the intelligence that lies behind it. Because only by knowing that and acting on it and benchmarking it can you really make the difference and measure the difference. So I will show you a lot of intelligence, and which it brings its questions out. And one thing I hope as we develop as a service is that we will use the intelligence we have both at micro level and at macro level to target our improvements. But let's take the SCQF awards here. Now this is actually level 4. Now level 4 is general level. To get 5 general awards gets you into a basic college course. Basic college course. You don't have 5 at level 4, you won't get into a college course. Better to have 5 at 4 than 8 at 3, quite frankly. That means 8 access awards or foundation awards. Better to have 5 awards at 4. Now if you look at that, it's not bad. You can see there. 79% of young people in North Lanarkshire indeed will actually get that. Let me move to the next one. 5 at level 5. 37% of North Lanarkshire youngsters. Primaries, head teachers, I want you to think for a minute. I want you to visualise in your heads your primary 4 class just now. Think of a primary 4 class of 30 young people in those 125 schools. Based on our performance nationally, and indeed in North Lanarkshire, just now 19 of those 30 children are going to get 5 credits. 19. That's all. Are going to get those credits. A third. In fact, I tell you a lie, it's the other way around. It's 11 are going to get the 5 credits. 19 are not going to get 5 credits, I should say. So 19 will not get 5 credit awards. That's important. Let's look at 5 hires. The gold standard of Scottish education. The thing that we aspire to, the thing our parents aspire to. Think of our primary 4 class just now, 10%. 27 children of 30 children in your primary 4 class just now, visualise their faces, visualise their working activity, are not going to get 5 hires. 27 out of 30. We take it to S6, we're down to a quarter of them will achieve 5 hires. Now, the reason I show that is not to say that in terms of attainment we're not doing well in North Lanarkshire, because actually what I'm showing you reflects the national picture in Scotland. I show you that because anybody who tells you the curriculum for excellence should not happen does not know what they're talking about. Because Scottish education for too long has been too selective in terms of what it focuses on and what its priorities are. And if you think back to this key I told you about, what happens in the present system of Scottish education is we open the key and the door for those young people who are in those categories. So we have a special golden door for 3 out of every 30 primary 4 children who get through into that lovely world. The other 27 have a back door. They're going through somewhere else. Not good enough. So what we need to do, in terms of as far as I'm concerned, is say, how do we change that? How do we resolve it? How do we improve matters? Now, the reality is that the academic education system was designed at a different time for different purposes. Hires were never designed for more than 20% of the population. There was an economic social development really going from post-World War II. So what we have the opportunity now in terms of the curriculum for excellence is to think creatively and differently about what we deliver and how we prepare young people across the piece to be the most effective they can be. And that means transformational change. That's where the phrase comes from. We need transformational change if we want to open our door to every single young person. And I'll repeat my point again, schools can't be left to do that alone. It's about partnership working to achieve that. Let me take us on then, finally, to my last piece of stats here about what happens when youngsters get to 16. Now remember, when they're 5, they're starting with almost a 8-9 point differential. Academic success is limited in terms of some young people, and we now move to the point when they're 16 years of age, or 16 to 18, and they're leaving our educational establishments. We do quite well. 62% of them will go to further or higher education, but that means the rest don't. If they're lucky, they'll get training, employment, or other positive destinations, but 13% of them will actually end up in the NEET category, which means not in education, employment, or training. As I said earlier, that is 458 young people. 458 young people are going to have nothing. Now, those 458 young people deserve more. Indeed, those in the training programs, we need to make sure, are they sustainable training programs or 6-week training programs? So when we get to the point of the end point of our educational provision, my view, and I'll come back to this, is we need to look very carefully at what are we delivering that is inclusive for all young people, because that's very important. That's just to kind of show you there what happens indeed when you go back to the SIMD areas I spoke to you about earlier, and you can see there what it looks like. If you're in the lowest SIMD areas, you'll see the profile there. And once again, if you're poorer, the present system means you're not going to do as well. And if I wind you back to say, why would that be? What's happening with them, what's not happening with them, how much of it is to do with courses, programs, expectations, culture, and values? Let's find out more. So, data summary. It's on the screen for you. I don't need to read it. You can see at all levels. And actually, if you look at that, the message is consistent. The challenge starts at 3, and it's not resolved by 16, if we want to be fully inclusive across the piece. But colleagues, we can do better. We are doing better, and we can build on that and do even better. How? I've used this in the past, and it's based in Maslow's hierarchy of need. And it's our ultimate aim, objective for children, young people, adults indeed, is indeed great learning. Now, when I was a teacher, what happened was I saw my responsibility as the great learning. I came in at the top of the pyramid. Others came in at the other part. But actually, I never asked who the others were. That wasn't my job. My job was to teach. My job is not to do this other stuff. I'm not trained to do this other stuff. But actually, colleagues, who is, if we're not trained? We are the universal service. We cover everything. And if you don't get these things right, you won't get the great learning. So that is why, for me, what's really important, and we're now into the GIRFEC world, is if we get the pyramid right, if we get the family stuff right from the beginning, working with the mothers, working with the families in the early years, and get the nurturing right, that indeed builds the health and well-being. And by health and well-being, I don't just mean physical fitness. I mean physical, I mean psychological, physiological fitness, all these things that build that confidence and resilience towards learning. And that is what this is all about. GIRFEC for me is not about Form 4. It's not about specifically just about children with additional support needs, although that's a very important feature of it. It's about getting it right for every single child. And recognising that for every single child, no matter where they are, if they don't have the health and well-being and the nurturing, that kind of set of cultural support around them, which allows them to learn, then they're not going to get to the great learning part of the pyramid that we want. And so what I would suggest to us is that one of our early priorities is to build on the work we're already doing around GIRFEC, but keep the broad picture out there. Don't focus on the language. Indeed, let's not talk about GIRFEC at all. I was talking to Val Corey recently. I don't know if some of you might know Val. And this is Val's idea. I stole it from her. I'm a historian. I plagiarise. Val said, don't talk about GIRFEC. She said, let's talk about getting it right for every child. Make that the phrase. Getting it right for every child. How are we getting it right for every child all of the time? And if we think about the hierarchy of need that I've described to you, what are we doing to make sure all that stuff's in place? Now, I have to say, colleagues, it is in place. I've been, as I said, I think about 16, 17 schools in the last 5 weeks in North Lanarkshire. Hugely impressed by what I see. Hugely impressed. You feel the ethos. You feel that nurturing, that sense of well-being. You see it this morning when you come into this building. So let's build on that, but let's make sure every young person has that. And actually, the challenge for us is to make sure that every teacher, every CLD worker, every early years officer, every central officer has the same philosophy underpinning what they do. And they recognise it's a collective responsibility to achieve these things. Because if we have that broad ethos and broad understanding in terms of our actions and behaviour, as opposed to our thinking, then indeed will make a difference. Harry Burns, can I hands up those of you who have not heard Harry Burns speak? Very interesting. Virtually all of you. I mean, hugely impressive individual. Impressive also because what Harry Burns does, which I like, is he says, these are the facts. That's all Harry does. He says, these are the facts, here's the science, this is telling you what the reality is, now go and sort it. And what he's saying up here are the facts. We're not the sick man of Europe. We have got the potential to do better. And it's all there. But it's about that kind of willingness I'm talking about to work together. And look what he's saying here. It's incumbent upon all public sector, also all public services to work together. And that's my theme this morning about working together in terms of partnership working. Because together we can make a significant difference. And there's some of the examples of that on the screen. It happens already. There's no rocket science here. In fact, I'd be horrified if people didn't get this stuff. The early years collaborative, really important. And particularly what I like about the early years collaborative, although it could be separated, is what's called the PDSA model, the scientific methodology about real-time testing. Now, actually, what I found when I was in Falkirk, and it might be the case here, a lot of the heads hadn't a chance to investigate that and find out about it. I think we should, because what we tend to do in education is we plan, we do, and after a year we review. And it might have made a difference, it might not, and we do it again. Whereas the PDSA model says you plan it, and as you're doing it, you're continually reviewing it. Small little tests all the time. Is it working? And indeed, 25% of the tests will not work. And that brings as much learning, if not more learning, than the 75% that does work. So it's about real-time testing. And I do notice, colleagues, that in terms of the inspection reports in North Lanarkshire, self-evaluation is an area that we tend not to do as well as the other areas. And I would suggest that part of the work we do collectively is look at hard intelligence, look at models of testing that. The PDS is a good way to do it, so that we really do understand the intricacies and the complexities of our actions and our behaviours, so we're making the maximum difference. But that's for a head teachers meeting. I'll come back to that. Other areas, nurture programmes, family support. I cannot underestimate family support. And the work with colleagues in CLD, the work with the broader services, with our social work colleagues, we need to get that right across the piece. And I've even put leadership decisions for early intervention. Now, I know this will not happen in North Lanarkshire. I'll say that first. But what strikes me is that we know that literacy, for example, is key. We also know from the intelligence that the biggest dip of primary learning is primary 4. Primary 4, primary 5. You'd imagine that primary schools would then say, right, if the dip is primary 4, primary 5, I need my best teacher in the school in primary 4 and primary 5 to deal with a dip, to make sure it stays straight or indeed increases. Using the intelligence. We know about literacy, being important to start, following from the early years work. I would want my best trained literacy people in primary 1. That's probably happening, but again, I like to test that. Are we thinking carefully, even about operational activities we have, small things, about how we manage our business that maximises based on the evidence and intelligence we have? Moving on. Even if we get GIRFEC right, what I've said to you just now, that's not going to be enough. We're going to have to do more than that. That gets the infrastructure in place. We now come to what I call the essential basics. And one of them is attendance. Now, if you look at this pupil attendance in primary schools, actually 94.4%, that looks good. Over 90%, you say, yeah, happy with that. Actually, when you break that down, recognising there are 190 pupil days in a year, that means on average in North Lanarkshire in primary schools, there is 11 days of absence per pupil. 2 weeks, on average. And then when you go to the 5.6%, which seems very small, who are actually absent more than 11 days, we're talking about 1,507 primary pupils. 1,507 learners, of our 55,000, who are attending less than the 94.4%. Now, we all know if you're not there, you're not learning. So if we're talking about getting the basics right, what are we doing about attendance? Now, I know we're doing a lot, but it's almost like, for me, as the kind of Einstein concept of madness. Are we continuing to do the same stuff and hoping for different results? Or are we thinking creatively and differently about what we're doing? Let's talk about that at a head teachers meeting, heads of establishment meeting, to pick that up. Let's go to the secondary sector. Average, 92.3%, looks okay. Yeah. That means on average, a secondary pupil is missing 15 days, 3 working weeks of learning being missed. Every year, statistically, because it's an average, and remember, some people with 100% attendance, some get less than that. On average, we're talking about 3 weeks of a 36-week, 37-week session for a young person. They're missing learning in the school. Indeed, when you go to the 8.7%, 1,840 pupils, two big secondary schools worth, are actually missing more than that in learning. So colleagues, the basics, one of them for me is looking at practical things like attendance. How can we improve that? Exclusions. Primary sector, we had 162 pupils excluded in 12-13 for at least 3 days, and those number of incidents we had. A lot of young people. And interestingly, you probably find those young people are the ones who are in the 5% attendance bracket. So they're missing. Now, this is not about the legitimacy of exclusion. I was a head teacher for 8 years. I have excluded young people on a number of occasions. We have to exclude young people on certain occasions. Absolutely. I'm not talking the merits or demerits. What I'm talking about is the impact this is having in learning in terms of young people not being present in the classroom to learn. Wind back to my point about the door being opened and the 55,000 young people. Some kids are not even there to go in the door. Secondary, we had 840 pupils excluded for over 3 days last year. Probably all legitimate, but nevertheless, there's an impact in learning in relation to what I'm talking about. So if we're getting the basics right, colleagues, we need to look at the basics around attendance, exclusion. Can we continually improve that? And actually, I have to say, we have improved this. I was looking at the figures of 3-4 years ago. They've improved significantly. So there's great work being done. But clearly, there's more we can do. I now look at a particular group of young people in North Lanarkshire, and this is actually very close to my heart, because I think in Scotland it is an absolute national disgrace what happens to looked after young people and in terms of their life chances, their academic chances. It's horrific what happens to them. And I've worked in the last 7 years in this is my 4th local authority: Aberdeenshire, East Ayrshire, Falkirk and North Lanarkshire. And sadly it's the same message. We're working very hard, but even though we're working very hard, if we take the academic performance of our looked after young people in North Lanarkshire, and I want you to think again about your class of 30, your primary 4 class of 30, in terms of getting those 5+ level 4s, the college provision, we're talking about 11%. So approximately of that class of 30, 3 of them will get 5+ level 4s, which gets them into a basic college course. And it gets worse. To get 5 level 5s, 2%. Of 700 young people, 700 young, that is a medium-sized secondary school. Imagine that was full just now, in one school, of every looked after young person. 700 of them. And we're saying, of these 700 young people, 2%, that's about 14 I think, will actually get 5 credits. 2%. 5 hires, the gold standard, none. None at all. It doesn't matter if you looked after at home or away from home. Indeed, if you're looked after, 10 times more chance of being excluded. Now, I know I've worked with looked after young people as a head teacher in the centre, indeed as a teacher as well. I know the challenges. But I want you to think for a second, you've all heard Harry Burns' work. And one of the things that really struck me about Harry Burns' work was his concept of, the cortisol impact of young people suffering stress because what they call the noise, based in Antonov work, trying to work out why was it in the concentration camps, 3/4 had ill health, 1/4 didn't, and they found that 3/4 who actually had the ill health couldn't make sense of their environment. It was translated as noise into their heads, which stressed them out, and it generated ill health. Harry Burns then did some more research and looked at the kind of work that was done in the Romanian orphanages about the babies and the children who were not responded to properly and were pumping out cortisol into their system. The cortisol prematurely ages, it creates ill health features as well, and it creates a sense of unhappiness. Looked after children are the classic group in our society who are in the category of noise in their heads. They'll tell you that if you talk to them, and they understand it. They have got cortisol pumping through their system. That is why looked after young children, as a proportionate percentage of society, suffer the worst health. It's science, it's fact. We know that. Now, I was doing a presentation at one of the secondary schools in Falkirk of staff one night after a school, and we're talking about this. And I had one teacher come up at the end, I'm a home economics teacher, and she was in tears. And it wasn't my presentation was so bad, let me tell you. But she was in tears, and she said to me, if I had known what you've just told me, I had 2 children in my class. I would have treated them so differently if I'd realised what was actually happening to them. And colleagues, I know what it's like in a school. I know it's busy. I know it's hard work. I know there's 30 children in a classroom, and we have these children kind of shocking behaviour and challenges. But if we understand the physiological reasons what's happening to them, perhaps we can treat them differently or understand better and therefore improve their educational and their life chances. Because I would say that one of the challenges I'd like to see when we're here is how do we improve the life chances of our looked after youngsters in North Lanarkshire? Because at present, they don't get a good deal. I'm moving on to literacy. For me, it's number 1. Core, theme of the basics. Let's get this right. I had a session once with 2 maths teachers, I remember. It was a union meeting. And it was just at the start of the new academic session. And they were both union reps, so we're talking to each other and complaining about the fact that their S5 had forgotten all their maths over the summer. And I got part of the conversation, and I said to them, have you considered for a minute that perhaps it's not the maths they've forgotten, but it's the language you use to communicate maths? And they looked at me as if I was daft. Historian, what do you know? Nothing at all. But to be fair, 3 months later, the next meeting, one of them came back and said, I investigated that, did some work, and you were right, in part. It was the language. Because we use language in schools around science, around social subjects. It's not common language. So if the kids can't decode the questions, for example, in central belt of Scotland, was coming from the northeast for many years, the difference between how and why tends not to be very clear to many. So if you've got a question that doesn't actually allow the differentiation of that, how can they do well? So I make the point, so it is really important that literacy levels are improved. And indeed, this is a community challenge for us. Let me go back to my family theme. If we've got, this is a national figure, we can extrapolate this into the North Lanarkshire perspective. About a quarter of our adult population have got literacy challenges. Indeed, about 4% are sitting with serious literacy challenges. So if we're sending a young person, perhaps in a low SIMD area, with a book back into the house, and the parents have got literacy challenges, they're not going to read to them because they don't know how to. And that's where the family work comes in. I mean, in being in some schools, I mean, I was in St Dominic's the other day with Teresa, some really interesting stuff happening in there. Great stuff, working with the families and young people. That's not my phone, I hope. No, it's okay. Just taxi for me already. But some great stuff happening, but we need to get into the families. And that's where working with our partners, working with CLD is so important to make sure we actually understand it better and to make a big difference. So for me, that's a key thing as well, in terms of the basics. I'm moving on to curriculum for excellence. Let me pause for a second. What I've spoken about is the data, the intelligence that tells us where we are in North Lanarkshire. From the early years, through to our qualifications, through to our destination profile. I've spoken about the GIRFEC agenda, how let's see it developed in its broadest sense, the impact that can make, but then how that needs to be supported by the basics, what I've talked about, attendance, exclusion, literacy, or looked after children. And now I want to move on to my kind of final main theme, which is the broader thing about the curriculum for excellence. It aspires to do these things. And I'm an absolute fan of the curriculum for excellence. I remember in 2004 as a head teacher, May Sweeney coming to me in Belgium talking about in the early days saying, yeah, we really want to get involved in this. It's been around for a long time. That was 9 years ago. So things have moved on, but notwithstanding that, we are seeing some big change. And talking to some head teachers recently, when they say, well, has there been change? And they say, well, actually look in the classroom, the answer is yes. There have been big changes, but there's more we can do. That's what we want. So if we're talking about all our young people having the door open for them, we want it within this context. Indeed, that's what it talks about. The CFE, you'll all be very familiar with that, of course. I don't need to remind you of this stuff. But some key points in there. It's about programs of study, about deepening learning, extending learning. It's about giving opportunities to mature contribution to the school, really important. And our young people at the very back of the room here have got, I'm sure, lots of opportunities to actually develop their contribution to the school, really essential. And learning and skills, I'll talk about skills in a minute or two as well. What it also does in the curriculum for excellence, for me, which is really important, I suspect most of you read Ken Robinson's book or know about Ken Robinson. If you haven't read his book, Out of Our Minds, Learning to be Creative, I absolutely commend it to you. First class book. He's also a first class presenter. He's done really well, but it's some key points there about what we want in creativity. When I was at Dial High School last night, they're back to the 80s, and it was the younger pupils. It was an amazing evening. 2.5 hours of an outstanding show. Young people just inspiring and motivated. And that, in fact, they captured for me. If I could video it, I would show you that and see there's creativity in action. It was great to see. But that's an essential feature of our curriculum. And more, I'm going to Kilsyth's show tonight. I'm sure that'll be first class as well. So we want creativity, we want the progression, we want the deepening, but we also want the skills. I'm setting the challenge for us just now. We want the skills. Skills are important. Now, have a look at this. It's a bit old now, it's 2010, but it hasn't changed in terms of priorities. That's what the employers tell us they want. I mean, we hear about literacy and numeracy, and that is essential, and I've mentioned that. But actually, when you drill it down to employer surveys, that's not what they say at the top of the tree. What they want is planning and organising, problem solving skills, and customer handling and team working skills at the top. Now just think of the opportunities in the broad general education, on the progression routes from primary to secondary, to have these skills embedded and properly developed. There's a story I sometimes tell, which is, I suppose, a sad indictment of my own education, is that when I was 15 years of age, I was at my wealthiest ever in terms of disposable income. It's never been as good all my life. Family, daughters, but it's never been as good. And the reason for that was a very simple reason, was that, like most young people at 15, I had a Sunday paper round. But I watched other people who had paper rounds, and some of them were a bit lazy about it. So I borrowed £10 from my mother, and I actually bought 3 paper rounds of 3 guys for the £10. And I only had one proviso with them. I said, I want you to rate your customers from the best tippers to the worst tippers in the line. That's all I'm asking for you for giving you £3. Get £1 in my pocket. So I got that. Then what I did was I redesigned the paper rounds and I kept the best tippers, worst tippers, and I sold 2 paper rounds for £5 each, got my £10 back, gave back to my mother, and I had 2 paper rounds of the best tippers, which was great. I then thought to myself, well, where I lived, and it was in Glasgow, was a place called Pollock in Glasgow. And I mean, shipbuilding was a big area at the time. And a Sunday morning, collecting my money was a disaster. I'd maybe get a 50% return rate. And I realised that if I went at 6:30 on a Friday night, I would get the guys back from the shipyards, had a beer and a good mood, and I would get a great tip. So I went on a Friday night, and I got all my tips on a Friday night, got a 95% return rate, which was brilliant. I then thought, the Saturday morning, why do I want to go out on a Sunday morning to deliver papers? So I subcontracted my wee brother at 10% of what I earned to actually do my papers for me. Now, the reason I share that story with you is that no one told me when I was 15 that I was asset stripping, I was doing market analysis, I was subcontracting, I was doing all these business skills. For me, it was just what everybody did. I was told, if you're academic, you'll be a doctor, a lawyer, or a teacher. Hated blood, law seemed boring, and I loved a history in. So that was my decision made for me. So it's moved on significantly since those days, really significantly moved on. But those skills are so essential for our young people, and we capture that. But more and more as we move in to this century, our young people need these skills matched with appropriate qualifications. So how do we deliver all these things? Well, for me, these are the 7 key strategies. And these are the areas I want us to work on collectively, along with the basics and along with GIRFEC. And I've put the top here, great leadership. Not good leadership, but great leadership at all levels. Because colleagues, in this room today, we are the leaders. We are the ones who will shape the future of those 55,000 children. We probably do not realise individually and collectively how much power and how much influence we actually have. We can change lives if we rise to the challenge. And I've always been one who believes in seeking forgiveness rather than asking for permission. I'm happy for us to look at risk-taking, to be creative, to go out there, to challenge. Let's do that. We are the leaders. We are put in positions of authority because people who have trust in us, they know we can make a difference, they know we can make an impact. Let's do it. And if there are barriers from the centre, anywhere else, talk to us about it and we'll remove the barriers. Because ultimately, all of the international research is clear that where heads of establishment feel that they're supported, but they've got autonomy and they've got creativity and freedom, that's when you see all these things developing beautifully. And that's the ethos I want to see assembled. My own philosophy is about working collegially. I'm not into hierarchies. For me, it's about the proper team working together. We're all doing the same job, just different ways of doing it. In fact, be it a cleaner in your school or establishment, be it someone who's a janitor, be it someone in the office, be it a teacher, be it yourselves or me, we're all got the same objective, is to help these 55,000 young people and their families. So let's explode our creativity and use that environment. And that's one of my key messages today, is I really hope that we can actually do that and develop it. The only barriers lie with yourself. I remember in the late 1990s, and I've forgotten the education minister in England, but she actually put a note out to all the head teachers in England and said, write to me about all the barriers that are stopping you doing what you want to do, and I will change it. 93% of those statements that came in were bounced back. And the reason why she didn't think they were not appropriate was that the 93% of those statements that came in were people thinking there were barriers that actually weren't there. They assumed they couldn't do it. They hadn't actually questioned and tested and asked. And what I'm saying just now is question, test, ask. How can we make a difference? Because that will really develop, I think, great opportunities for our youngsters and indeed make the job really exciting as well. So great leadership to me is vitally important. And at the end of the day, the second theme for me, it's about in the classroom, it's about the teachers and early years officers. First-class learning and teaching. No matter what I do in this business, I can't impact on little Johnny or Jean if the teacher in the class is poor, or the early years officer is not delivering what should be delivered. In fact, better to have a really good teacher in a massive class than a really poor teacher in a small class. It's about the teaching. So how can we make sure that we get the very best teachers who are properly trained and really making the difference? And part of that is about having all our teachers, our early years officers, indeed CLD, people involved in working with families, young people, children, highly trained with effective, collaborative, impact-based CPD. And I really want to support that because that is what will make the difference. And it's also the most exciting aspect. And actually, we're in a window of opportunity just now because with the Donaldson report, with the National Implementation Board, there's an explicit recognition that these things are vitally important. We must capture it. And this is not, and I know budgets are going down, but actually, a creative use of a budget is vital. I mean, the only thing I said I wouldn't talk about budgets, but I mean, the budget for this service is £500 million, £500 million. Okay, we're having to save 35 million. Actually, the budget for this service is now £465 million. It's a lot of money. Let's use it wisely. And let's make sure the priorities, which is about great teaching, great leadership, and great CPD, are part of it. And part of that is about the collaboration. I go into schools, and I'll talk to heads of establishment, and they'll show me some great practice. My first question is, who knows about this? Why is it not shared? Why is it not out there? Because every bit of good practice is a nugget, it's a gem. And we should be sharing it with everybody to make sure we all get the best opportunities. It's not being protective. We've got a collective responsibility to 55,000 young people. It might not be in your establishment. There are 55,000 young people in North Lanarkshire who need that opportunity. And if you have something in your establishment that could make a difference, by him is an obligation to share. And for us all to share. And just imagine if we open that as well into the sharing of the best practice and being out and being collaborative, based on the intelligence, based on the data we've got, based on our understanding of what the needs are, what a difference we will make. So I want to see that further develop as well. And that will bring a higher level of challenge. I've been speaking to the quality improvement team recently, and one of the things we're talking about was inspection. And I'll be clear with you colleagues, one thing that I've noticed coming to North Lanarkshire is the obsession about inspection. Yes. I don't share that obsession about inspection. Yes, we want good inspection reports, but actually, if we focus on what I'm talking about here today, any inspector at any time should walk into any of our establishments and see the practice and say, yeah, okay, that's good. And indeed, if we're using the intelligence and the data and knowing our establishments well, and we say, here's our information, here's how the youngsters are performing, here's the SIMD background, here's the added value, here's the interventions we're doing, take it away. If you don't like it, I'm sorry, but we think, based on our self-evaluation as leaders, in collaboration, that this is the best practice we have. And I'll tell you, colleagues, because I've spoken to Bill Maxwell, another senior, that's what they want to see. They want to move away from the old model. So the window of that is really open just now for us to be more creative, more flexible. And so the level of challenge that will come over the next couple of years, I want to change. My challenge will be, if you've got great practice, get it out there. My challenge will be, if you're performing really well, and I've got a limited resource, I don't need officers coming to visit you all the time. If I've got other establishments that need the support, I need them in there, perhaps on a more conjoined basis. So it's about, as a service, me knowing what the service is about, knowing where the priority schools, establishments are, what needs to be done, and using the resource cleverly and effectively. So the challenge will be more intense because indeed, if indeed you're performing well, and we say, okay, light touch, we'll step back, we might come in to challenge differently and say, well, okay, we've left you alone, show us now, show us your evidence. Shows you're doing this stuff I've talked about today. And let me see that happen. And I'm sure that will happen. So what I'm saying to you, first of all, my point here in this one is, let's get away from this focus on, will do this, will the inspectors like it or not? I don't care if they like it or not. What I care about is it impacting on these 55,000 young people in a positive way that want to happen. And that leads on then to appropriate courses and programs. Now, we know about that because I've told you about the present SCF performance. We need to look at that and indeed partnership buy-in. This takes me to the other end of the education spectrum. And I know I've got everyone here today, but actually, my view is that an effective team, everybody has to understand everybody else is part of the business. Because if you don't understand the other person's part of the business, then you can't contribute in any particular way. So understand, that doesn't mean you're an expert in it, but understand it. And understand what the role you're playing, what you're doing, how that will potentially impact across the next stage. So for example, colleagues in the early years in primary might think, well, this is post-16, what's it got to do with me? Well, actually, the children that you have nurtured and developed are the ones eventually will end up in this period, at this phase. And so it's important that you've given them the core skills, the core dispositions, that kind of sense of well-being that gets them in a good place at this end. So I want to talk about this area. I wrote about this in the Times Ed. I'm a sad person, actually, I couldn't write in the Times Ed. I would be stopped now. Because they've changed it. It's changed the Times Ed quite a lot. They've kind of lost their Scottish contingent and it's gone down south, so I'm not happy with that. But anyway, what I'm saying about reverse engineering is that there's a massive debate a year ago around secondary schools. And I have to say it was partly fueled by what's happened to the Scottish Government, which wasn't helpful. It was about, do we have 7 courses or 8 courses in S3 going to S4? How many courses do we have? And parents were up in their arms about it as well. And it went national. Actually, it was the wrong question. Completely the wrong question for a senior phase of education. What the question should have been was, what is the destination profile of the young people in North Lanarkshire, and indeed in each of the localities of North Lanarkshire? What does it look like for a particular secondary school? And what does it look like for the past 5 years? And once you understand what it looks like, work that back into the system and say, for example, let's just say, for example, I'll jump back to that. Let's just say that reflected X Academy. So X Academy knows that 36% of their young people are going to go into higher education and 26% will go into further education. Now, if you're a private business, talking about customers, you would say, okay, I know that 36% of my young people need university hires. So 36% of my courses and programs will cater for that cohort. Now, I can't speak for this authority yet, but I know when I was in Falkirk, I had some good sessions with secondary heads, I would say, show me your senior phase course choice programme. Show me your profile, and if you've got 36% of your young people going to university, I'm hoping I'm not going to see 80% of your courses being hires. Because you're not catering for the needs of your customers, of your young people. Similarly, 18%, 1 in 5, of young people are going straight into employment. Employers complain often about young people not being ready. Well, if we know that 18% in my school over the last 5 years are going straight into employment, what am I doing in terms of my pathway from the age of 14 to make sure these young people are indeed equipped to go into employment? And the important thing is they're getting equal value. And I could go on. So what I'm really saying in terms of reverse engineering is the opportunities of the senior phase are to start at the end point in North Lanarkshire and the communities, work it back and say, what do we need? Now, schools can't do this alone. And for all colleagues, that is why I'll be having conversations with the new principal of the college to say, we need to work together on this as a community, and indeed with partners in community land development, with partners in regeneration and services and business. I had a good session, in fact, was the St Andrews Prize given on Monday night, spoke to the chief the speaker, who actually runs a business in Prestwick but lives locally. I was talking to him saying, how do you get involved with us working? How are we going to make sure that business are involved? Because the partnership for me extends right across the piece so that we've got a properly joined up model of senior phase working. And that to me is really what is important. And it's sad, really sad, that the Scottish Government missed a trick in that one and focused obsessively on courses and programmes. The Serene Wood report will pick this up, but let's be proactive and let's get in there quick. In fact, if I just jump back, my last point in this one is my 3K check. This was, perhaps fortunately, a Tory proposal in the 80s, and that's why it crashed and burned. But just imagine, every 15-year-old pupil came into a secondary school as head teacher and said, sir, I have a cheque for £3,000 just now for my education. What are you giving me? Now, if I'm offering you 5 hires and you're that chilled, you'll happily hand your cheque over. If I'm offering you a couple of bolt-on courses, maybe a bit of work experience, maybe a bit of PSE, would you hand your £3,000 cheque over? I don't think so. So just visualise mentally, if every young person had that cheque in their hand, are they getting equal value for their money? And I'll leave that one with you. So to kind of wind up my presentation, again, I've taken this from the Education Scotland corporate plan because I think it sums up nicely some of the themes I'm talking about. Prevention. They talk about prevention. I've spoken about the role of GIRFIC, or getting it right for every child, and that whole nurturing programme. And I think, colleagues, that's a key thing for us. How do we prevent? How do we develop prevention in a way that young people, families from the beginning have that kind of level of support that's required? Partnership. At this point in time, in 2013, heads of establishment cannot afford to say, I can do this alone. If we're going to develop all these teams I'm talking about, it is about working together and recognising everyone's got something to bring to the table. And that means sometimes giving up power, which is hard. But giving up power, and indeed giving up resource. Because I'll make one final point in that one. I was in another secondary school once, a couple of years ago, and one deputy said to me, I've got a marvellous course I would love to deliver for 20 pupils in a vocational skills programme, but it's £15,000, I just can't afford it. I said to him, well, that's interesting. I said, can I see your course choice sheet? He showed it to me. I pointed to one. I said, advanced higher drama you've got running here? He said, yeah, great. How many children? 3. Okay. How many will complete, do you think? He said, well, one's got an unconditional, this one may stay, possibly 1. That course is costing you £14,000 because you've got a PT running it. So you're telling me that you've got a course at £14,000 for 3 pupils, 2 of whom may not finish the course, and you get 20 young people who potentially could be neat, and you can't afford to run a course for 20 young people. This is not about me giving you another £15,000 to run another course. This is about you, as a leader and a manager, looking at your resource and your budget and saying, how do I meet the needs of my community? And that means in some cases, you don't get everything. I mean, a wise man once said to me, you can have anything you want, but not everything. And it comes down to that, what do you want? Because you cannot have everything. So ask the hard questions, and that's part of leadership and part of developing it. I know there are complexities in terms of what I've described to you, but the point is, I think, is a very valid one. So partnership working is important as well, and recognise we're all working together, the people. One of the things that the speaker at the prize giving at St Andrews said in his business, he works worldwide, and he said he worked in Dubai, he worked in New York, he'd worked in Scotland, he worked in Europe, and he said he works with failing businesses, he works with successful businesses, startups, and he said the one fundamental denominator underpinning all of this are the people. And he's right. If we get it, if our staffs get it, then we'll make the difference. And that's where the support I was talking about earlier is so important. And performance. Let's be clever about our performance. Let's measure it. Let's know what we're doing. Let's not do C-pass answers. Let's give an A-pass answer and make sure it's most effective. So, colleagues, to summarise my presentation, these for me are the priorities. Early intervention at all stages, because it never stops. I've mentioned the earlies a lot today. We have children now at 12, 14, 16 who need that family support, who need the intervention as well. Let's focus ourselves on that in the areas where it's most needed. The GIRFIC approach, I've rehearsed in detail with you. Health and well-being, it is fundamental to what we do, absolutely fundamental. And I'll say, colleagues in the secondary sector, I was speaking to some colleagues recently, we're talking about areas in terms of management changes that we've mentioned, 33-period week, we've mentioned management structures, for example. For me, it's all about curriculum. It's about learning and teaching. How do we configure what we do to get the best impact in the curriculum, to make sure that health and well-being, the attainment is right. And those are the kind of forms of dialogue I want to see happening with us. I don't want operational matters dominating features. And I know that's the views, certainly of my officers as well. So we want to make sure the curriculum, learning and teaching drives everything that we do. We need better academic attainment. We need appropriate courses, appropriate qualifications if we're going to let these young people get through the door. And we'd be creative about that one, I think very cleverly about it. And finally, it's about working together. It's about our partnership working across the piece. So please, open your doors to all the colleagues who want to work with you, because doing it together, we will make a difference. How do we measure our success? It's on the screen for you there. I won't go through it in detail. And finally, why do we do it? And that for me is why we do it. Thank you, colleagues.